It's so lovely to see so many familiar faces and some new names as well. So welcome to our last session of 2022. We greet you from very cold England, but I hope that some of you are in much nicer environments, maybe with a little bit of warmth and sunshine, so that it helps your thinking, because tonight's session was introduced by Joanna's blog, which most definitely challenges some of our thinking, particularly when she introduced the post-humanistic element in her thoughts about Vygotsky and Piaget. We continue to explore the developmental series, always looking at the tensions between the learning by the individual and learning within a community. And as you know, it's probably some of each. It's never so singly polarized as the lone scientist or child only learning from an environment where there is a community of learners. But we have got very strong connections between both Piaget's and Vygotsky's theory and Montessori's own pedagogy. So for today's session, we thought that I would just share with you some of my thoughts, refer a little bit to Joanna's blog, but also to simplify it, because sometimes we can get a little bit confused about all the terminology and a little bit overwhelmed by it. So it's not, again, for those of you who have not been to one of these sessions before, we are not looking at explaining Piaget and Vygotsky. We are looking at seeing or searching for some connections which are relevant to children of today. And of course, we need to start by looking at Jean Piaget, because for long period of time in his life, he had very strong connections with the Montessori Society in Switzerland. And quite naturally, as Montessorians, we feel that our understanding of the Montessori pedagogy is very closely aligned with Piaget's thinking, simply because he looks at the developmental trajectory, which resonates with Montessori. He looks at the sensory motor stage from birth to 2, which really links so beautifully with the spiritual embryonic stage of the child. He also talks about the pre-operational child who engages so strongly with the environment. And then he looks towards the child as the child enters the operational stage in the childhood period of the child's life, when we begin to think abstractly. We know from Montessori that she felt that children are capable of abstract thinking earlier than 7 years of age. And we also know that Margaret Donaldson strongly challenged Piaget's view on this very specific way of looking at capacity for abstract thinking. So again, we must acknowledge that whilst we learn a huge amount from Piaget, there are some challenges in his theory, as there are always challenges in all theories of child development. We often celebrate Piaget's thinking about the child as the scientist, because the child learns from the environment and is very curious about how the environment works. Joanna, in her blog, referred to the child as lone scientist and grappled with this idea of loneliness. And I would like to park it there, because we will return to it in a moment. When we look at Vygotsky, we are looking at the connections which are not as obvious in Piaget, but they are much more implicit in the way how the child uses materials. So the whole idea of scaffolding, the activities to develop skills, is very linked, very closely linked with Vygotsky's ideas about how children learn. And also there's this importance of the child learning from more able others. And for that, the vertical grouping of the classroom, or the 3 age bands in the classroom, are an absolute haven for that opportunity to learn from a more able other, and sometimes make the adults somewhat redundant, if you, particularly if you think how children absorb the activities of everyday living. We often say, well, no, they don't need any introduction to it because they have already learned from their more able adults, sometimes at home, sometimes at nursery. I think that what is really important to understand, that for us as Montessorians, the environment provides many opportunities for that kind of learning from more able others. And recently, I came across an article on the importance of the environment by a Montessori colleague from Poland called Beata Bednarczuk. And in that article, she talks about the hierarchy of material and human within the Montessori environment. In other words, the environment wouldn't be what it is without the human input. And those of you who visit lots of schools might agree with me that sometimes we go, within the first 5 minutes of entering an environment, how committed the adults are to preparing it for the children, or if they are preparing for themselves. Yes, there will be a flexibility in the environment. You will see the love of the adult mirrored in the care and attention to detail they have prepared for the children. So that relationship, the environment, is not something that is static. The environment is something that is very, very organic, and should be very organic if we really want to serve the needs and interests of the child. And so in that context, Beata said that all elements in the prepared environment really support the more knowledgeable other. And the environment itself serves to be as more knowledgeable other, which is really the tenet of Vygotsky's theory, that the child learns so much more if they have got the company of more knowledgeable other. And so it is really important to consider both of these approaches, and in a way seeing them as intertwining each other. They are not separate. It's not only the Piagetian view of the lone scientist, or only the Vygotskyan view of learning from more able other. Within one morning, you might be seeing both of these models taking place. And Joanna talked to our colleague Lynette Brock about the study of Piaget's schemas that she has done together with John Siraj Blatchford. And what Lynette said was really, really interesting, that we can see how the child develops both schemes and schemas through observation and imitation. And I think that particularly if you are working with the, 18 months to 4-5-year-olds, that capacity to imitate what you see children do is very, very powerful. I'm reminded of this all the time, how the younger granddaughter will so desire to imitate what her sister does without ever fully understanding what it is that she's copying, but she just wants to be so much like her. And you see that in the classroom. If a child finds a friend whom they really admire, they will do it. And particularly if they find a friend who sometimes has got a bit of mischief, that person with mischief in their mind is so much more powerful other. And we often say, don't be silly. We undermine it. We don't value it enough. But it is a human relationship that really is very attractive to many children. So then how to swerve the energy to a positive end is really the challenge of the more able adult. And do we want to really do that? So what Lynette said is that children learn most of their new actions and behaviors from significant others, and also children and adults around them. And that would be, as the adults are part of the environment, it would be that interaction of learning with others and also from the environment. It all comes together as one whole. What Joanna leads us to is she urges us to think about the importance of play in context of both of the series, because it is during play that we really come to learn a little bit more about where the children are and what they understand about the world. And so it is really important to also grapple with Montessori's idea about fantasy, or how we have come to understand the idea of Montessori's fantasy, where we deny or don't give enough acknowledgement to the fact that young children are capable of very powerful imagination. They are capable of very strong understanding of the difference between reality and what is not really real. They will often tell you, I have had many 3-year-olds telling me, don't worry, this is only pretend, because as if they were sensing that I'm a bit anxious about the play that they may be doing. They said, don't worry, it's only pretend. Reassuring me that everything was okay. And so it brings us to this idea of animism that that Piaget describes as the kind of feature of the pre-operational stage, where children give life to inanimate objects. And, you know, that is so, in a way, it becomes charming sometimes when children do that, but it is very much part and parcel of the whole nature of growing up. And I'm not necessarily saying that you have to encourage it in your classroom, but I think you should really look at it and see what it means to that particular child, and acknowledge that this is part and parcel of the child growing up. I think sometimes we try to negate this particular trend in our behaviors. And of course, some children are using the animism much more powerfully in their plays, whilst others will be much more focused on real experiences. But we need to acknowledge that symbols become a very, very powerful part of the pre-operational stage, and that we need to see or explore what it really means in our classrooms. I think that Joanna's introduction of the postmodern view, where she talks about children's engagement with object or matter rather than activity, is an interesting, because it allows us to look at the child's knowledge of the world in a slightly different way. I really liked the quote that she used, where she said, children's conception of the world are children's knowledge. So in other words, how the child perceives something at a given time, that is an important part of his knowledge, which may be scaffolded later on, but we mustn't ever negate it as unimportant. I think it has got a value in itself, and we should honor that value that the child gives to this knowledge that they have at that moment. She talks about the knowledge being, they are the concepts through which children make meaning in the world, and as such are more than preconceptions or misconceptions. Children's knowledge matters, and for children, matter seems to matter. So she is really pleading with us that we need to take the children's understandings seriously, acknowledge them, celebrate them where possible, because they make significant steps towards their development and towards their learning. I think that for us, all of us, the real challenge is that we do not often know what really matters to children. And we mustn't forget of Montessori's reminder that we really need to look and listen even more intently to learn a little more about each child in our environment. And remember that we may never really fully understand what the child is meaning by their actions. But we need to understand that these actions represent the child's desires, but also the child's dreams. And I will park it there. I think that is enough for today. There's plenty to think about. I don't believe for 1 minute that we have covered everything, and we will be able to resolve some of these things that we will continue to think about as we acknowledge the importance of both Piaget and Vygotsky at a time when they are seldom mentioned in developmental theory, but they are fundamental to in helping us understand where the children are at, and perhaps guess a little bit more what it may be all about, because we will never know. So at this point, the questions, we will do exactly the same as we have done before. We are going to break into groups, and we have got 3 questions to discuss. One of them is reflection for yourself. How much importance do you give to play opportunities in your classrooms? How do you feel when a group of children creates play opportunities and scenarios in the prepared environment, which may disturb the harmony created by the adults? So when your classroom looks in total chaos and you would like it to be a little bit more orderly, but the children seem to have a great time. And I would like you to perhaps share an anecdote of your observation of children learning from each other or learning from the environment. In other words, are they learning the Piagetian ways, or are they learning Vygotskian way, or how do they meet together? Gwendolyn will organize us into groups again, and we will have about 25 minutes or so.
Yeah, I've actually assigned you 30 minutes today, and there are 4 breakout rooms. There's a group with you, Barbara, and a group with Suzanne and Heidi, a group with Wendy, and a group with Marion, if that's all right with Marion.
back, everybody. I hope you had a wonderful conversation, or as wonderful as we have had in our chat room today. I wonder if Suzanne and Heidi would like to share with us some of the pearls of their conversations.
Thank you. We had a very nice conversation. We went from a brand new student all the way through to somebody who'd had their school for 30 something years. So it was really nice to have the contrast. What was interesting, I think, is still that there is a distinction, I think, in the adult, that there is a difference between work and play. And one of the ladies in our room put it very sweetly. She says that, play is sort of gently segregated from the work areas, so that there are spaces where the children work, and then there are other places where the children can engage in more play. And the reason for that was given as the amount of space that they had. But in further conversation, there was still that children were still allowed to explore. And then we raised the question whether there was a difference between exploring and playing, perhaps. We also just explored that, I think most of the people in our room did agree that play was worthwhile and important, and that we wouldn't necessarily stop it unless it was unruly or dangerous or really impacting on other children. We touched on the value of vertical grouping and how it actually teaches children how to play, or how the children who are a little bit older, who've been in the space, can actually teach the younger children how to play, how to engage. And then the sort of pearl of wisdom that we had was that as the adult, we really need to learn to let go and allow the children to be and observe.
Yes, and that is the hardest thing for all of us to learn, particularly if we have got Montessori in our blood.
Yeah, Barbara, I think that's something that came out, was that, in our minds, we have this idea of what this Montessori classroom should look like. And one of the people in the group was explaining how the children were, in fact, engaged in an activity. They were playing, but the school tour was coming around. And so from the window, he could literally see the school tour arriving, and knew that there would be a little bit of trouble if, children were found under the table playing instead of working. So yes, the adults' perception
that can definitely create a huge tension.
Yeah.
And it also reminds you how we need to make our Montessori classroom kind of unique for something. And often, because we want to have a unique space to sell to the parents, we forgo some of the children's freedoms, or cannot articulate the importance of the children just having this space before they start compulsory education, where they need to be themselves, and that we are there to kind of hold them in that being themselves. I think that it's tricky. It's really tricky. Yes, challenges. We will not, as I said, we will not resolve it tonight. And anyway, Marian, may I ask you to share, please?
Yeah, we always have such lovely chats. I mean, it was really enjoyable tonight, and we kind of went through all of the questions in at the same time, really. So we talked about what would you do? How do you feel when something, the second part of it, when a group of children creates play opportunities? And we had such a lovely example from Liska. She's from South Africa and working in Albania. And she was talking about the children who had got hold of the continence globe and were kind of whizzing it around, as they do, on their agenda, not what our agenda. So they were whizzing it around, and it was, so she just, how amazing, I'm in awe of her. She just took that moment to reflect. Right, okay, so I'm not quite sure I want this to be happening. So how can I do the Vygotsky and support this child. I'm sure she didn't think all this, but this is my interpretation. And so she's very quickly made some passports. So she talked to the children about these passports. Oh, look what I've made, passports. So basically what happened was she got the situation where they all had their passports, and they moved the globe round slowly, and they shut their eyes, and then they pointed, you know, when it stopped, where they were pointing was where they were going to go on their trip. So, you know, they set up the aeroplane, which, let's face it, in every nursery, certainly in mine, you know, the chairs are cars, coaches, trains, all sorts. In this case, it was an air trip. And they had to spin the globe slowly. And when they got to the place where they touched on the continents, that they went there on the plane, and then they talked about what they might find there. You know, oh my goodness, what a learning opportunity that Liska had brought about from something where her reaction could have been, you know, oh no, don't no, that's not how we use that. We'll put it back on the shelf up here where you can't touch it, but you can see it. You know, I'm not talking about what we do in my nursery, but sometimes we've all done it, haven't we? If we're honest. And I absolutely love that. And this guy, you know, 10 out of 10 for thinking on your feet and being inspirational, being creative. We talked about what was play. You know, it's this whole thinking outside the box. It's this whole Montessorians, don't we see opportunities rather than challenges? That's always been one of the fundamental things that I've believed in with Montessori. She kind of looked past the current situation and looked at what were the opportunities, you know, how can we problem solve, how can we be creative in our thought process to actually create something different, to use this as an opportunity to learn. Sumaya gave us a lovely example of the fact that we can't be in the children's brains. We actually don't know what they're thinking. So we do need to step back and wait and watch. And then maybe the wonder will come about. She gave us an example of, for many, many years, the Pink Tower every morning was in a particular location. And every, you know, finish of the day, it would be moved to another location, always the same. So after several weeks, years maybe, she decided to observe this, and she observed it. She didn't really come to a conclusion, but she managed to talk the rest of the staff and everybody into relocating the Pink Tower to where the children clearly thought it was better. And she can't honestly say why. She doesn't know why the children, but they all put it in the one place. And I was reminded again by Montessori principles that follow the child and how important that is. Sorry, my phone's going off. So, but I think I've finished. We need to be reflective. We need to look at what is actually happening in life. I'm going to have to mute myself. Sorry.
Thank you, Marion. That's really, it's wonderful to be sharing those little anecdotes from which we have an opportunity to learn so much. Wendy, what about you? You are on mute again.
Now, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah.
We had an interesting group, but unfortunately, nobody was working within the nursery age. But one lovely lady is still, she's just finished her training, and she's still looking for a real Montessori nursery. But she did actually tell us something which really made me put my head in my hands, because she said they're allowed 40 minutes a day on the Montessori material, and the day is split up and they can't touch the Montessori material out of those 40 minutes. So, but she has moved to another nursery now, and she did give us a lovely example of fairly early on, she had a little girl who was just not interested in the red rods, and so she thought she'd play with them herself. And so she did. She started playing, and then this little girl joined her, and showed quite an interest that she'd never shown before. And then as she was packing them away, the child then started feeling the lengths of the rods and really enjoying it. And one of the people in the room did say that she felt, and I think this is probably, that often a human being has to be involved, and it doesn't have to be a teacher, but it can be another child. And she gave this wonderful example of the Roman arch, where this little boy who was just, he couldn't do it, and then suddenly he could, and he almost exploded with all the things he was doing, seeing how many of the bricks they could pull out, and it was still standing. And then he then took on the role of teacher, teaching all the children how to do the Roman arch. And I found that the trinomial cube is another thing that children really play with. And one of them will show the others how to use it. So there were several sort of quite useful comments. There were 3 elementary teachers, so they were saying the elementary children master the concepts of play much quicker. And one of the settings, they have block day on Friday. So it's the end of the week, the children are getting a bit tired, but they can have block day and they do all sorts of things. But they have access to all the Montessori material as well if they want it. So we had lots of interesting discussions, but I'm not sure we really answered your 3 points very well, Barbara. But they use those to stimulate the discussion.
Well, do we ever answer the questions that we really ask? We skate around them and find something that we can learn from each other. That's all that really matters. The questions are there only to prompt things. That's all we need. I think that in our group, we had such fascinating discussion about this chaos that can be created in the classroom, and how we handle the chaos and how we manage it, and that the age of the children will often determine how it is managed. That the younger children, particularly younger children today, probably need more space for more open-ended kind of play, and they put their blocks next to the role play area, and the children were building things that were familiar to them. So you, in a way, through the language and through what they build, you learn huge amount about the children and what they know. And I was sharing that our little Seren created huge chaos between the living room, the kitchen, and the conservatory, where she created a celebration for her dolls with tons of things spread around. And I said, well, I think it's about time we should put it away. And she absolutely understood that it was time to put, but what she did was she was collecting things that came from the same place. So she was multitasking rather than just taking one thing at the time. She already knew, I need this bunch of stuff here. And then Diana made such a lovely comment on that. She said, it really showed the power to restore the order and the resilience of the child. And I thought, yes, you know, there are opportunities to learn so much by allowing the play to take its full cycle, and the cycle is determined by the conditions of the environment. You know, we had to put the toys away because we had to collect her sister from school. When there was a chaos in the nursery, we had to put away because everything else had to be put away. And we actually, you know, that's how it is. And Pamela commented on the importance of not necessarily always playing, but having conversations with children, and how much one learns from those conversations about the children. And we sometimes forget, we are so anxious to present, we forget to speak or to hear what the child is telling us. And I think it is, I come back again to Lynette's comment that we need to listen, and we need to really observe what the children are doing. It's so much opportunity to learn about the children. And Diana also reminded us of a Froebel lecture she went to, where they said play is within the child, and it is inherent part of the child. And I think we need to remember that. And maybe as Christmas are approaching, and we will all have a little bit more time once we have got everything ready, maybe we should try to find the play which is inherent within us as grown-ups. How about that? I think that's a good way to send you away. And just to remind you that we will be back in January, and Diana has very kindly offered to talk to us about the importance of leadership in our environments, and maybe the person who is searching for the right environment for herself can learn a little bit about how to manage to learn with others for the benefit of the children with whom we work. Thank you, everybody. It was lovely to see you. Have a good break. And we'll see you back on the 24th of January. Thank you, everybody, for your input. Thank you.